Hello everyone. My name is Shakayla Alvarenga. I am the Director of Public Programs here at the Mob Museum. And welcome, thank you for joining us for this important discussion about prison reform in Nevada and the root causes of crime. This is the second in a series of 3 public forums titled Breaking the Cycle of Incarceration. And during tonight's program, we will explore the root causes of crime and various ways to keep people from going to prison in the first place. And it's important to preface this discussion by acknowledging the horrific mass shootings in Laguna Woods, California, in Buffalo, New York, and Uvalde, Texas. When we began working on this program series, this particular issue was not the focus, so tonight's expert panel may not be able to speak exactly to that subject matter. However, we do hope that you walk away tonight with a better understanding of incarceration in the state of Nevada, and we will hold space for an audience Q&A at the very end of this program. So let's begin by introducing our panelists for this evening's event. We kindly ask that you hold your applause until the very end. Jacqueline Winter is the Specialty Court Administrator with the 8th Judicial District Court. Winter oversees the clinical coordinators involved in the 13 specialty court programs, including program development and oversight, fiscal, and grants. Winter is a licensed clinical professional counselor with the state of Nevada. She graduated with a bachelor's degree in human services with a minor in addiction prevention from UNLV. She also has a master's in clinical mental health counseling from UNLV. Winter has worked with adults, adolescents, and children for the past 16 years within the judicial system and various community-based providers. During Jacqueline's profession, she has provided individual and group counseling, substance abuse counseling, and clinical case management. Sitting next to her is Amy Magnus. She is an assistant professor of political science and criminal justice at California State University, Chico. She earned her PhD in criminology, law, and society from the University of California, Irvine, with an emphasis in law, society, and culture, and race and justice. She also has a master's degree in criminal justice and a bachelor's degree in psychology with minors in philosophy and criminal justice from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Dr. Magnus teaches, researches, and publishes about the intersections of crime, social inequality, and structural deprivation in American society. Her education and expertise center the root causes of crime. She is the author of the forthcoming book, Uphill Battle: The Politics of Rural Inequality, Grassroots Activism, and Social Justice. And sitting next to her is Trish Guerin. She is the author of 3 authorized biographical books and a historian of the Black experience in her native home, Las Vegas. She is a 3-time international award-winning documentary producer, a civil rights activist who has been recognized for her efforts by the NAACP, the National Action Network, United States political figures, and an array of organizations. She is the recipient of the Martin Luther King Presidential Award, Nevada Humanities Judith Weinzeiler, and the Universal Peace Federation Ambassador of Peace. She holds a business marketing degree from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and she is an honorary Indiana University Hoosier alumnus. And sitting next to her is Director Jack Martin. He is the Clark County Department of Juvenile Justice Services. He has over 20 years of juvenile justice experience. Mr. Martin brings an eclectic range of experiences to the department, having served in California, Arizona, and Hawaii before arriving in Nevada in 2009. His unique leadership style and direct experience rebuilding troubled systems gives him a unique perspective when incorporating innovative and time-tested programs into our juvenile system. Mr. Martin is a believer in second chances for children and has dedicated his professional life to improving the systems that serve children and families. Martin graduated from the University of Phoenix with his Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice Administration. Now I can take a breath. Now please give all of our panelists a round of applause. Thank you. Understanding the root causes of crime is key to understanding the inequalities associated with incarceration. A question that we asked: what does transformative criminal justice reform look like? Now, throughout tonight's discussion, we hope to explore this question and further analyze what we can do collectively as a community to create a better society. So Dr. Amy Magnus, we'll start with you. Welcome back to Las Vegas, and thank you for being here tonight.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
How has your upbringing in Southern Nevada kind of shaped your interest in crime, inequality, and social justice?
Yeah, I love this question. Thank you for asking this question. So I grew up in Las Vegas. I was raised in Nevada. I moved to California just for my PhD, but I have a very deep-rooted sense of pride in being from Nevada and being educated in Nevada. But one of the interesting things about that storyline is I did grow up in Nevada's public education system, which notoriously ranks some of the lowest, depending on the metric you're looking at, in the country, right? So currently we're ranked 49th in terms of education and what we are able to do for our students in this state. So with that upbringing, I grew up in a space where education was not invested in, it's still not. And that shaped my outlook on who I grew up around. You know, the fact that I was able to get a higher education and a master's degree, a PhD, it seems like actually an anomaly for people that I grew up with. So that's unfortunate and it's striking, and I want to talk more about why that is the case, but also why structural investment in things like education, in things that bring people a social safety net, like healthcare, education, adequate housing, things of that nature, make a huge difference in terms of crime outcomes and also how we punish people. So I would say that that's really what shaped me in a lot of ways.
And as I mentioned, Dr. Magnus's education and her expertise, it centers on the root causes of crime, but it also includes the structural forces in American society that produce strain and hardship and hyper-punitiveness and conditions and histories in which certain communities have been hyper-policed and arrested at higher rates and incarcerated in greater numbers. So can you talk to us a little bit more about your studies and what you've learned from your studies as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I was trying to, as I was thinking about this question, boil down many, many years of education and real lived experience in the field into a few minutes. So I wanted to boil it down into a couple of key themes that have stood out to me over time. The first is that the state of our society, especially our criminal justice system, is not an accident. It's deeply rooted in the foundations of our society, most notably slavery, property ownership, and things of that nature. That culture, that history follows us. We are not immune to it today, right? We are still seeing the ramifications of institutions and slavery still seeping into our social institutions, not just the criminal justice system. But one reason why we see so many Black and brown people in particular in the criminal justice system is this long legacy that we have seen filtering into our law, filtering into our systems, filtering into who gets the ability to write and enforce law. So all of that history really colors what we see today. So I would say that's the first big key theme of my studies, is this historical element, this cultural element that really shapes what we see today. As a result of that history, we tend to see what we call entanglement with the criminal justice system. So we tend to rely very heavily on the criminal justice system, the legal system, to respond to and even try to solve some of society's biggest social problems, right? So we see this quite a bit with homelessness, for example, that we use the criminal justice system a lot to deal with this social problem, yet other societies don't quite do it in the same way as we do. Why is that the case? So those are some of the questions that I answer in my work and try to think about a lot, is why is criminal justice sort of our go-to institution? Why do we fund it at such high rates, whether that's policing, courts, prisons, what have you? Why do we fund the criminal justice system at exponential rates at the sacrifice of other social institutions like education, like healthcare, like adequate housing? That's a big question that I don't think all of the panelists here can answer necessarily, but again, it ties back to those historical roots and our priorities as a society. And again, we are unique in the United States in those ways, where a lot of other Western societies in particular don't necessarily handle crime or define crime in the same ways that we do in the United States. The third key idea that has come up for me in my work over the last several years is the idea that as a society, we need to want to transform the criminal justice system, and we need to want to have transformative justice initiatives at the forefront of our minds. And to do that, right, hyperpunitiveness is seeped into our culture as a society. We're a very individualistic society compared to other countries that have much more collectivist approaches to crime, collectivist approaches to social ills like homelessness, like medical issues. And so how do we get out of that? How do we move beyond that? And what I'm hoping we can talk about throughout the panel are creative approaches to that problem, thinking about ways to disentangle the criminal justice system from some of these problems, as I see that as one of the most powerful avenues to thinking differently about crime, but also trying to ameliorate inequality in some important ways.
Thank you. Now, Trish Guerin is a community organizer on the local and international level. Trish, what is the social impact of incarceration? And maybe you can elaborate more on what Ms. Magnus was saying and what you hear from people in the community.
Well, first of all, it's already a disadvantage before the crime has been committed, economically and socially in the community. So once a crime has been committed, what's the first thing that most of the families do? They put up their home for as a lien for bail or whatever, and then that causes a discrepancy within the families, because then this person is taking away from the other members. Once they return, what are they returning to? A lot of their parents might have gone on. Something might have happened, or they start fighting over the house, so therefore the community suffers. They cannot get a job to sustain what the family wants to leave them. So even if they had in Vegas, I can just speak, for example, for Vegas, Las Vegas, growing up here. You can have education. They have no respect for education, first of all.
Yeah.
It's who you know, and it's still who you know. I remember helping a gentleman who had a master's degree from Harvard with the city of North Las Vegas. He kept saying, they have not called me, they haven't, and he was at the top of his class. He's a black gentleman. So what happened, as soon as I made a phone call, he gets the job, and now he writes all the major grants. So the opportunity is not there. You can have education, you can have all of this, and then in the communities, what is in the communities? There is no walking to areas of opportunity. If they do have things in most minority communities, there's Section 8 or low-income housing rather than mixed development. So you're trying to you can't put a grocery store. If you do, that's not going to last. If you put a CVS, that's not going to last. So where are the jobs in the immediate community areas? So you have a person who's out of work coming back with a crime, with a past, and so they get training, and then now what, So in Las Vegas, there's a huge disadvantage. Now, when I was in San Francisco in the Bay Area, they applaud and they support education. And a lot of the imagination of so many of them have their own. That was the goal, is to create your own, develop your own as an artist or as your own little coffee shop or what have you. There's a lot more going on out there than out here. But as far as this opportunity here in Vegas, they have very little. It causes a lot of incarceration, causes a lot of problem, causes a lack of hope. Yeah. So there's a problem already there. And then you can't go home because there's nothing there to motivate you, to keep going. And then how many players? I remember organizing all the NBA and NFL players. Somebody had to do it. How many have come back to help the community? And when they have done that, how many of our politicians have robbed those funds or those programs, blind? So we have a problem within the community all around. And then when you have people who do make it and can get out, Neo or whatever his name is, all of them, I haven't seen them come back and get record deals and all that. So there's a discrepancy there, and it seems like it's just like a jar and like little bugs in it, and you put a cap on it, it's just meant to smother you. So when they tried to redline the community away from Symphony Park, which is $1 billion development, and have just the west side area, blocked off, that was 40-something years ago. They knew they've been trying to do that in order to possibly take over that land. But there's something has to be done in the community first, let alone, but as far as crime, if there's no opportunity, it's going to be a repeat. There's going to be a repeat. And then there's a homelessness. Then if you have a record, you can't get low-income housing. In Philadelphia, I believe they've signed where the men are able to apply for low-income housing, where everywhere else you can't. So therefore, the crime will go up. And there's a repeat going on there. So the laws need to change on the books as far as that's concerned.
Let's bring in Mr. Martin and Ms. Winter as well. In your opinion, what factors contribute to criminal behavior? What are the basic causes of violent crime, if you can try to brief that in a way?
Ms. Winter?
So I would say from the adult side, we see within specialty courts, a lot of it has underlying issues of substance use and mental health. And so a lot of our participants are cycling through the system seeking or needing services and not able to obtain them. And so we see them cycle back in and out of the justice system. So I would say that's a big cause that we see on our end.
I would argue, and thank you for the question, I would argue that we systematically beat hope out of young people, especially young people of color within our systems. And you look at some of the stats that come out, my system will never be good for a child. Never. As much as I'd love to look at you and tell you how wonderful your taxpayer dollars are being spent, I'd be lying to you. Because children that touch probation systems fail. All the research tells us they escalate into adult systems, they escalate. So the best dollars that we can spend as a system is stop the escalation of children entering our system. That is making an equitable and level playing field for every child. Every child matters. There are no exceptions. Zero exceptions. We don't seem to believe that when it comes to children, especially children of color. We have to understand that all of these children deserve all of the chances that every child deserves throughout the valley, whether that be access to medical, health care, access to hope. I mean, we forget that hope is not a wish. A wish is, I wish I won the lottery. That's very different than hope. Hope is about establishing a plan, making a plan, having the resilience and the support network to create and execute that plan, and then being able to do that. And when we systematically tell certain segments of our population that hope is not for them, it's for somebody else that doesn't look like you, what are we hoping to expect? What are we hoping to see? What we're going to see is kids filled up, and you come into my system, and you'll see walk at Spring Mountain Youth Camp or detention or any of the multitudes of prisons I've worked in. They're filled with people that don't look like me, and I would argue that's intentional.
Now, John Martin was a captain in the California Department of Corrections, and when we talked, you mentioned that this was an eye-opening experience for you. Can you explain some of the challenges that you faced in corrections?
Oh, corrections is, it's warehousing is what it is. I mean, when you have 4,000 men in an institution set up for 1,800, right? And, you've created, adversarial systems based on race, wealth, class, all the different things that are occurring within an institution. What are you really hoping to do? My day, every day was spent keeping the place safe. Not about making the community safer by making these men better, right? We live by 5 simple words here in Clark County Department of Juvenile Justice Services: safer communities through successful youth. If I can make youth better and make them successful, I will inherently have better communities. In corrections and adult corrections, that is not the goal. The goal is, stack them and rack them, make the place safe, continue to sell the narrative of this is a gang problem or this is a larger, law enforcement, issue, where it's not. Oftentimes it's not. So, but corrections taught me very early, and I got in the business in '87, so I've been doing this for a little while. And I am a recovering Californian, so please don't judge me, okay? But I'll tell you, it taught me very early that I was missing the boat very early, and that dollars invested in adults is wasted dollars, where the better money is spent keeping people out of systems. That's the best money. That's not to say that corrections can't be valuable and it can be reformed, but the best money spent is dollars spent in education, dollars spent in mental health, dollars spent in food equity and housing stability. Those are good dollars.
And we also talked about the importance of implementing a cultural change within these agencies, and perhaps this is a topic that others on the panel can talk about, but especially when it comes to over-policing. But Mr. Martin, we'll start with you. Why was this important to you, and what kind of policies worked for you?
Well, first and foremost, we have to understand that policing isn't working. Policing in general is reaction. We're reacting to issues that are occurring that I can predict are going to happen based on the structural institutions I put together. So if we know that's going to happen, let's invest. And we truly, as a community, believe that all kids and everybody is equitable, and that we're going to build an equitable system. Then we need to invest properly, right? And that investment properly is rolling it back, right? And culture, when we hire. And I'm going to make fun of Kansas a little bit. I was born there, right? When we hire a bunch of big-ass white boys with fade haircuts that are ex-military, and we say, hey, this is going to be your line of work as law enforcement, and we make compliance and we make law enforcement objectives the number one objective, we're already failing, right? We have to understand that second and third and fourth opportunities, hiring people that look like the communities in which we serve, understanding that not every issue is a law enforcement solution. We're sitting around right now and we're blaming the Clark County School District for the violence that's happening at the schools. That to me is the most ridiculous conversation I've ever heard, and we want to know, why aren't we putting more police in there? Why aren't we putting more this in there? But parents have been absolutely allowed to get away with putting this on everybody else in the community other than themselves. I have 7 children. Go ahead and let one of my children act up at one of these campuses. There'll be a foot buried so far up in that child's hind parts. I am going to parent my child. There will be no Twitter. But these are the things that when we talk about culture change, we can talk about organizations, and they do need the culture change. But guess what, parents? We need that same culture change conversation. Get your asses parenting your kids.
Anyone else on the panel that can comment?
I totally agree about putting monies in the programs before the issues occur. Knowing, instead of waiting on something to happen and then you have money, oh, wow, we have money to incarcerate you, we have money to put you away. And, I just finished a book co-writing with a gentleman in Los Angeles on the notorious American gangster and drug lord Alpo Martinez, who was killed 14 people. And smuggled like $50 million worth of cocaine on the streets for years. He became a government informant. And what happened was, as a 15-year-old child in Harlem, he would have had a chance because they had this program called, Fresh Air Fund program, where urban white families would take inner city youth and take them in the summer and spend time with them and take them and go to parks and things like that. And in his case, they went to this place that had all these deers and they had these trees and things like that, and he never forgot that. So as he went along, he got in trouble in high school, and it turns out where he got probation, went to Rikers, got probation for stealing this little coat. And they wanted him to do the probation in Harlem instead of Albany, which is where this white family, the Clintons, has been keeping him, especially during the summer. Then it started going around the holidays. If they would have allowed him to stay in Albany with them, and his mom wanted the white family to adopt him, he would have not became this notorious killer. They would have saved them just like that. But the probation officer insisted that he do his probation in Harlem. And his mother knew when he goes back into that community, into the same environment, he was going to go right back into criminal behavior, which is exactly what happened. So that program is very successful. And that's all he wanted to be, was a fireman. And that's all he wanted to do was, trees and deer. That was his last wish before they killed him last October. So as he got out and became an informant, he ended up going back into the same community. Then, of course, it didn't work, right? But I mean, I've seen them have chances, but there's always a snag because of these black males. They don't have confidence in them, or they don't feel that they can trust them, or don't believe in them no matter what. But that is one example that I know he would have been a very successful man if he would have had a chance.
Now, Ms. Winter works in specialty courts, and Nevada was one of the first states to authorize specialty courts back in 1993. Now, for those who do not know, Ms. Winter, can you explain what specialty courts are and what data you've been able to collect over the years?
Yeah, thank you for that. So specialty courts are just that. We're special. We serve a specific population and try and get them access to services once they are either through diverting or in the justice system or exiting the justice system. We try to offer treatment. We have stable supportive housing, and we try to wrap them with any service that they need throughout our system and our programs. And so we have 14 different programs throughout juvenile, district court, and we have a diversionary program and a reentry program. And so we work on trying to capture anybody at any point throughout the system, either through diverting once they are in contact with the system or upon reentering the community.
And the data to some statistics that you may have.
So we track data. We track the population that we serve. We track how many people are completing and are successful in our programs. We track what drives them into our programs, whether it's mental health diagnoses or substance use, drug of choice. We also track recidivism rates. We get those, we track them 3 years after exiting our programs, whether they graduate or terminate the programs. And so we track any trends that we also see within the populations that we serve.
Now, these programs do not completely divert you from the system, but it's designed to keep people out of jail or prison. But there is the LIMA program. So can you talk to us a little bit about that and how these programs differ?
Correct. So LIMA is our true adult diversionary program. We do not arrest, we do not have citations. We truly try to have you get access to treatment, housing, resources to help you get stable and reintegrate into your community and not have to enter the legal system. We hope that if we can wrap you with these services and get you access to the things that you need, that you won't come back in contact with law enforcement, that you'll see different opportunities and not end up in the legal system. However, if you do end up getting an arrest or you are placed in the justice system, if it's substance-induced or substance-related or mental health-related, we can then potentially, as a part of your negotiations, get you access into specialty courts and get you opportunities to still remain in the community and get treatment versus incarceration. However, we also have seen that that's not always going to be somebody's option, and so we've worked on building our MAT reentry program, which helps people get early release from prison and access to treatment and services, or have an option to have early parole to enter the programs.
Thank you. And there's also the Harbor program. The Harbor program has served more than 11,000 youth here in Clark County. The program works to interrupt the school-to-prison pipeline. And Mr. Martin, can you talk a little bit more about the Harbor program and how that works too?
I love the Harbor program, and we're actually up to 25,000 children. So 25,000 children, any child anywhere in the community, anybody in here can refer a child to the Harbor. It is a juvenile assessment center. Yes, the kids named it. There are no harbors in the desert, so shut up, okay? The kids got to name it, and it's a rad name, okay? So any child can come there. We do 2 validated assessments. We figure out what's going on with the child, and then we wrap that child in resources long before they touch the system. The goal is to keep black and brown young people ages 0 to 18 out of our system. As of yesterday, those numbers were 90% of the children that had gone to the harbor were not escalating into juvenile justice. So we're super proud. There's 5 locations throughout the valley. Any child can be there. And the real crux of it is it's free. We've paid for everything from violin lessons for a child to instill hope and give them something to do, to had in-home services, to whether those be mental health services, to pay for soccer, to getting access to dental care. Children that have teeth that hurt do not do well in school. Figuring out all the things that are happening with the child and wrapping them in these resources. So it's been my proudest moment in 30-something years in law enforcement, being able to do something proactive. And it has had massive results. Our caseloads are down. When I started with the department, we had 260 kids incarcerated. We're down to 91 this morning. We had over 6,000 kids on formal probation paper throughout the valley. I think as this morning, we had 1,200. Our caseloads are down to 1 to 23 versus 1 to 90. We're seeing more success on the back end, and we're actually working with the kids on probation that are actually a risk to the community. They're not just the kids who make us angry, they're the kids who actually require an increased level of supervision. So it's been an incredible piece that has taken pressure off of the justice system and also wrapped our community in resources, free of charge.
What kind of challenges have you faced, especially in a state like Nevada? The topic keeps getting brought up, where education is severely underfunded.
Well, it's incredibly difficult. Just getting people to having the conversation took me 3 years to open our first harbor. Having the first conversation and talking to law enforcement professionals, probation officers, judges, everybody, and saying, listen, $1 of investment spent up front is going to save us in the long run. And here's now, and I'm not even going to talk the numbers, okay? Let's not talk the numbers. Let's talk about what's right. What's right for children. What's right for children is connecting them to the resources before, right? And the challenges are, when I first moved here, a lot of my consultant friends called me and said, you are moving to the Mississippi of the West. This is not a place that is going to value your conversation about equity, about leveling the playing field, and that's been very true. It's been this has been an uphill walk, uphill battle.
Mm-hmm. Ms. Winter, what about you? What kind of challenges have you faced with maintaining the specialty court system here?
So our programs are all voluntary. You have to want to engage in the programs, and you have to want to have change. So sometimes it's very hard when you have somebody come to you at their lowest for them to see that they want that for themselves. So sometimes they start not really fully engaged and they get there, but they're also a lot of work. It is a lot of effort that they put in to be successful in these programs. And I think sometimes it's very hard to see them be so successful and come out so strong after completing the programs and still have their case follow them and not be able to be dropped down or dismissed, to have a true reflection of all the hard work they did throughout their time within the system, to have that changed. So now they are stronger, they're sober, and they have a case that follows them. So for us, it's really hard to see not more options for cases to be dropped down or wobblers or dismissals, to really incentivize people to want to help themselves or engage in specialty courts.
Mm. So there are cases where an individual may commit, let's say, a felony DUI. Now that's when a defendant commits a third DUI within 7 years, and they are able to participate in the felony DUI specialty court program. And, we've also seen horrific cases of deadly DUI cases here in Las Vegas. So I'm sure that for maybe someone in the audience or for some people watching, that they may have a problem with that. Is that fair? What would you say?
So for us, per our statute, we do not take cases that have involuntary manslaughter or have a death as a result of an FDUI. So for us, as the statute, they are coming to us with their third misdemeanor DUI, and they are going to be within 3 years. So they cannot have a previous felony DUI, and they cannot have substantial bodily harm as well as part of the DUI. So for us, the programs are very hard. People that are facing their third DUI, they're looking at a minimum of 3 to 5 years in prison. 1 to 6, where versus coming to our program, it is 3 to 5 year program commitment. And it's a lot of work. To be able to enter the FTUI program, you're looking at a minimum of 6 months on CCDC house arrest. You have to have a breath interlock device or a bid on any vehicle that you are going to have in your home or where you reside. And if you can't afford to do that, you have to have a club on your car. You have drug testing. You have intense treatment for a minimum of 3 years, and all while doing court appearances and still expected to work and maintain. So it's not an easy transition to just participate in felony DUI court. It is a commitment to want to really change yourself to where you can address the behavior that got you into this position to begin with.
How do you do that if there is someone who doesn't want that option?
So it's completely up to them. They have to be willing to participate in the program. It's a part of their negotiation of what they select with their case. They talk it over. We do assessments and screenings with them, discuss what the program commitment is if they're interested, and they make that as part of their negotiation with their attorney. So it's something that they choose to do. At any point, they can select to not participate anymore, and they would go back and they would serve their prison time.
Dr. Magnus, what are your thoughts on specialty court programs and diversion programs as it relates to the root causes of crime?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate what's been said already, and I want to raise maybe a different perspective or a different way of looking at it. What we find is that when specialty courts are used, they're least successful when they are done with a punitive approach. So when they are mandated through something like probation or they're court mandated for some other reason, if folks feel forced to do this work or to go through these programs, we tend to find that they're a little bit less successful. We also find that they're less successful in the ways that, as we were talking about earlier with the mark of the criminal record, right? And how that stays with people. Specialty courts have a really unique opportunity, especially with young people. We've seen this with teen courts, for example. This is something I've advocated for in my work, where record sealing and record expungement is a really important opportunity to get people past their criminal experiences or crimes that they've committed, be able to move on, be able to qualify for certain types of housing and education that they didn't qualify previously. So I think that's really where specialty courts have a unique opportunity to do something innovative and to do something new. And since we do fund the criminal justice system much more than any other institution, I think that's really one way that specialty courts have a really interesting window and a step into that avenue. So I think, again, expungement and record sealing is an important step. Thinking about doing it from a non-punitive approach, voluntary approach is really important. And then I would also push for ideas outside of the criminal justice system altogether, right? I think that we rely way too heavily on our system. We use courts, police, prisons as the answer to really all of our social problems. We really do. So while I think that specialty courts have a lot of potential and they're going in the right direction, there's also a lot of other ideas out there of things that people and communities are doing that don't involve the system at all. And I think those are the most fruitful and important avenues that we need to pursue. So for example, in Newark, New Jersey, there are entire teams of community members that go out and try to resolve gun violence or gang violence, for example. The police department doesn't get involved in those. They do have some relationship with the police, so that way those calls for service go to what's called the community street team, as opposed to the police department. We've found a lot of success with programs like that, and it's diverted, thinking about the idea of diversion, diverting entire communities out of the purview of the criminal justice system, not getting police involved when they don't need to be involved. This is also similar in other institutions where we see calls for service. This is happening in states of like Oregon, Colorado, where we see calls for service coming in and police are not responding to those calls immediately. Sometimes the social worker is sent out, a housing advocate, a domestic violence advocate, to figure out what the best steps are for that particular situation and for those people. Those have also been shown to have a lot of success of disentangling and moving people away from the system when they may not need to be involved in the system. Now, and I want to make it clear that it's not necessarily the police's fault that they're the ones to always respond. In some cases, that it's problematic, but we rely on police too much to do too much of our work in society. And we put too much on police to do that work. And so how do we take some of that burden off of police, try to restore some semblance of a relationship between communities and police, and remove some of that hostility in the process, knowing that there's good reason for that hostility in many instances. But also, like, how do we solve some of these problems? How do we truly divert people away from the system when they don't need to be there?
Mr. Martin, I would like to hear your thoughts on that too, as someone in law enforcement, and a subject that we've talked about a lot here at the museum, about I guess just this over-reliance on law enforcement in general, and what we can do as a community to change that kind of culture.
Absolutely, I agree. That's the entire purpose of the harbor. The harbor is not law enforcement run. We have adult mental health there. We have Department of Family Services, which is child welfare. We've got all these different organizations, and we have private providers that are providing the services in the home, because once she uses the term disentanglement, that's because she has a PhD. I say when you get your ass out of the system, right? When the system stops Velcroing itself to you, right? Because I need a job based on system involvement. It's a bastardized system at its core, right? Right. So the reality is you know, how do we do that, right? And that is by having long-term relationships with private providers. Police do not need to be responding to domestic violence cases. 90% of the domestic violence, we've been programmed as a community to believe it's this knockdown, drag out, punch around. 90% of the calls for domestic violence is what I affectionately call mother shovers. You know, new boyfriend in the house, low level, somebody's been shoved, but it's really not a violent situation, but somebody's going to jail based on our laws, right? And now we've got 12 hours. I'll just give you an example in juvenile. You're going to pull the kid because the kid's easier to pull. We pull him out, we put him in jail for 12 hours. At the house, mom and new boyfriend, mom's talking he's talking 12 kinds of crazy for 12 hours, right? You're gonna let him talk to me that way, boo, 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 right? Kid's not getting any services at my place. 12 hours later, magically they're back together in the living room. What's happening? You know, it's a get down at that point. We've set that child up for this future escalation, right? Where if law enforcement never responded and we actually sent somebody there that could actually resolve the problem, it's a moot point. And then we stayed with that family to wrap them in resources that they required, what actually was the root cause of why this domestic violence call was made. Now we're talking about really making change.
Ms. Gibbs, yep.
Oh, I just have a question. Your concept of getting the record sealed and expunged, what about when you fill out an application? Were you ever committed for a felony? What are they supposed to put?
Right. Well, and there's a whole movement around ban the box. I'm sure you've heard of this idea where this is really big in California, and it's gotten some legs in other states as well. I wish it would get some legs in Nevada. And it's called the ban the box movement, where at that initial stage you wouldn't be asked that question, where that would entirely be removed from the employment process. Now, in states like Nevada, there's some exceptions to that. So for example, in gaming, there needs to be that conversation of if there is a criminal record, what types of crimes, things like that. But overwhelmingly what we see is that folks who are, you know, entangled in the system, to use the term that you so love, that these ideas of people who have committed crime, these are crimes that maybe wouldn't be a threat to that employment situation, right? Or wouldn't pose any kind of risk. And so why introduce the bias that we know exists on that job application up front? Why not remove it altogether?
Didn't Assemblyman Tyrone Thompson pass that bill, ban the box? And,
Maybe.
And I believe we automatically expunge records at 21.
For juveniles.
Yes, so juveniles automatically on their 21st birthday, unless it's a sex offense, get expunged. So,
Yeah.
and please don't compare us to California.
Well, and I can speak
Please
from
don't
the
do
adult
that.
side. our Lima program is a great representation of that. We really are not utilizing, it's a partnership with Metro, and they're not going out there to police. They're going out there and building relationships with the community. They're more therapists than they are police. They work hand in hand with our clinical team, and they're out there providing resources, helping people get to appointments, getting them access to different things that they need. They're taking them stuff that they didn't have. So they're out there really trying to show a different picture of law enforcement. They're really building that crisis intervention and a response to help de-escalate versus having it escalate and them having to have somebody from law enforcement come out and remove them. Also, from our program standpoint, we also have seen such a heavy growth within the community of supporting people within the specialty courts. We know that if we can get them stable housing, get them access to stable mental health services, treatment to address substance use, they're able to be more productive members of our community. So being able to meet the needs of what have been barriers to them that got them into our system have really shown longer success for our participants. So I think we're starting to see a lot of movement towards addressing the root cause to really help see how we can keep people out of the system.
Thank you. A lot of our conversation, it comes down to money. And so I'd like to hear from all of you, if possible, on better funding and what that would look like and what that would mean for our communities.
I don't want any more funding. From a probation department, I don't want any more funding. I would just as soon we invest in the harbor, which we've demonstrated through a 5-year plan, has demonstrated reduced dependence on incarceration. Take that money, invest it in education and mental health. Right now in Southern Nevada, we're woefully neglected in mental health. I run the largest mental health hospital in Southern Nevada. That is my detention center, and that's a travesty. There's children in there that don't have the level of criminality, they have no business being there, but there's no other place for them. So let's, you can cut my budget and let's invest in some other places that will be proactive and reduce long-term recidivist numbers. So I don't want any more money. You have it. Just don't invest it here.
For us, I would say investing in clinicians, having more clinical members of our team. We're very fortunate that every single one of our programs has a licensed clinician attached to it, if not multiple, depending on the size. And if we have more ability to hire more clinicians, they're there to be able to help identify from the beginning the needs of the client. How do we help them, their family, help them progress to meet their potential? So having more access to clinical staff would be amazing.
As far as funding, and you mean within the communities, and it just seems like so much of the funding, like with Nevada Partners, it's always benefiting the people who work there more than the people who are trying to get the help, And it's so interesting how you can be right smack dab in the middle of a community, and the people right down the street don't even know you exist, or they don't know what you have to offer. They don't know you can take CCSN, or adult education classes there at high school, unless somebody tells them. It just seems like it just benefits the people more than the communities. So I don't even know where to start as far as funding. I really don't.
Seems like there's a disconnect between some community partners and the actual community.
A huge. Yes.
I'd love to comment, but my PERS and my really good salary would tell me to shut the hell up.
Which is getting to her point, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think too, to build on this, I think it's so important. I think I've actually raised the point of maybe divesting a little bit from the system, but I almost don't agree with that message completely, right? Because people who are in prison currently need resources. They need access to education, they need access to job training and skills-based training. They need a plan for when they leave prison, when they re-enter society. They need social connections. So if we think about prison placement, for example, we throw a lot of money at building prisons, but we don't often think about where we're building them. We're building them in often rural communities where their families can't come see them. Costs a lot to have just a phone call with a family member. So why not try to reestablish social connections for those people who are already in the system? We can't necessarily take them out of the system right now, but thinking about being strategic in those ways, even though we know that we want to reduce incarceration, I think that investment there can be really meaningful. And I'll come back to this point. I think we have so much evidence, I mean, this isn't even a question anymore, about the impact of education. Access to basic needs shapes long-term outcomes in a person's life. So whether or not they are going to commit crime, something that they do is being defined as a crime because of their race, because of their neighborhood, because their neighborhood is hyper-policed, we have to think about those issues too, and think about strategically and structurally investing in people, because the way that we invest in people is indicative of a society's culture. And I think when we start to invest more in people and their basic needs, we will see drops in crime. We will see less of a need for the carceral system. And so in that way, I think it needs to be both immediate and grassroots and tangible, but we also have to play the long game. We have to think about putting the criminal justice system out of business. We have to really do it meaningfully. And so the ways that we do that, I think, are both structural and immediate.
So Jeff and I were talking before this program about just the importance of community and how important we are to one another, really. And at times, it definitely feels like we've lost that in a sense. And so Mr. Martin talked about parenting and the crucial role that parents play in our lives. And so what is community? And I would like to just hear from all of you on that, and how we, as a family in a sense, can do better by each other.
So for me, Las Vegas is my community. I am born and raised second generation. Both my parents were born and raised here. My kids are raised here and born here. So for me, I really do have a passion for investing where I've grown up, my family has grown up and still lives here, and where my kids reside. I have a true passion in wanting to see our whole community be better, because it's an investment for my children, and I want a community to be good for them. So I really do, I have a passion for what we do here and how we care for one another and what we can do to help each other and be better.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Being born and raised here and committing a lot of my research to the state of Nevada, even though I'm in California, I have a very deep-rooted sense of pride in being from Nevada and being from Southern Nevada, even though, yeah, sure, there are a lot of things that we don't necessarily have to be proud of, but I think it's attitudes like this where we can come together. And I would say, community to me in that way means recognizing that we all have a role to play, even if we're not immediately involved in organizing work or in the justice system or in doing research on the system, that each of us have a role to play. I have this idol of mine, his name's Ronald Sullivan. He's a professor and a lawyer and a social justice activist. And his famous line is really, justice is a decision. Right? Like every single day, we can choose to do justice. We can choose to stand up for each other. We can choose to speak out when injustices are happening. We can choose to go to council meetings, city council meetings, go to the legislature and speak out against something we find unjust. There's levels of being able to do that in our community that we don't necessarily have to take huge steps or huge strides right away, that in our everyday lives and interactions, we can be there for each other. We can stand up for each other. We can speak out against injustice. And so for me, I do really think that justice is a decision in that way, and I think that helps build a sense of community around people, and especially in a place like Las Vegas in Nevada, where there is a lot of work to do. So doing it together is going to get us there faster.
Being born and raised here, community is, wherever you live, I think it's important to know your neighbors, know the community, what's going on. Where I was born and raised is on the west side of town, the Mississippi of the West, coined at that time, and also probably a little bit still going on. But it's important that they have someone that they know that has their back. And so it's good to check in. It was great to organize them and show the entire city that they do want more. The blacks in the community did want more. They don't want to be shut out. Whether they're dormant or they seem like they don't, they do. And it was nice to know that Sierra Club or communities, organizations all over helped organize and fight the fight of the closure of the street. So it's good to know that wherever you live, you should know all of the people around you, their phone numbers, everybody, you get together. If there's a group home, you don't belittle it or you fight it. Maybe you might want to donate clothes. In my cases, I had a lot of Nike shoes donated. And so the guys kind of feel like there's somebody who believes in them or there's some hope there. So it just starts right in your backyard. Community is right in your backyard, and you should be comfortable enough to be able to walk down the street or know what's going on. Like you said, the police is not there to, watch and do everything for you. That's your job, to know what's happening around the corner, to, know your surroundings, be very careful. In our case, we have a website or anything that goes on, and that's the way you feel safe in your own neighborhood, in your community. The police can only do so much, and we have to stop reacting only when something's wrong. We have to start also reacting and coming together when something is good going on, which is what my community has a problem with. If you notice everything around the world with blacks, especially when we protest and organize, something is wrong. So it's time that we start getting together like that when there's a fight or something, and put the TV on the front yard, have everybody come, or in the park. When something is good, I think that's going to make a big difference, because you never know what people are going through within their homes. That's what I feel.
Mr. Martin?
Yeah, community to me is really simple. You heard a lot of really great answers, and I mean, for me, I have 320,000 babies here in Southern Nevada. Those are all of our kids that are enrolled in Clark County School District. I'm not from here, but I don't believe in that. I have to be from here to love this. It's not where you're from; it's where you're at. I grew up in foster care. I grew up in juvenile justice. This is, some of the greatest lessons I've learned in life are smile at people, love on people, ask people. When you see a problem, get involved. My mentor used to tell me, you get what you tolerate. I'm not willing to tolerate people being evil to each other. I'm not willing to tolerate a child being hungry standing next to me. I'm not willing to tolerate injustice happen right in front of me at the grocery store. Somebody calling somebody outside their name. I'm not willing to watch an old woman cross the street by herself, struggling to carry her shit. We as a community have to stop tolerating nonsense and be brave enough to get in that space. You know what? There's going to be a Karen who's going to yell at you and call you 3 kind of names. Get over yourself. You still have to get in. You still have to get in there and help. There's going to be somebody who's going to try to sue you. Who gives a shit? Community is loving everybody and understanding that everybody around you has the exact same capability to be excellent, no matter what they are, and they all have the right to be excellent, and that you can support them to be excellent.
Well, and to kind of touch on it, if you're kind and you show compassion and you help your neighbors or your community, it inspires hope, which then hopefully they don't end up in the system. Kind of touching on what Mr. Martin said earlier. We need more hope. And being kind and caring to others is very simple. It's free. It's easy. But it's not somebody's go-to a lot of the time. And so getting back to that is really important.
Thank you. We do have just a few minutes to answer any questions from the audience. Our Jeff Schumacher has a handheld mic, and he'll bring it right over to you if you just raise your hand. So if anyone has a question, we have one right over here. Yep.
I guess I'd address the entire panel on this one. We have 5% of the world population in the United States of America, but we have 20% of the world's prison population. What does the statistic mean to each of you as to the issue of root causes of crime? Are Americans just inherently evil people that we should have 20% of the prison population of the world? There are, despots in the world that admire the fact that we can lock up so many people.
Anyone can answer.
I think it's an indication that we're failing people, that they're not getting the resources soon enough to have to not enter the system. I would love to say that there's no need for the legal system, and we would be doing better, but I think it's an indication that we're failing each other. We're not getting the resources soon enough to people when they need it, to where they don't feel a need to commit crime to survive or just meet their basic needs and end up in the system.
I think it comes back down to history and culture when I opened up with at the beginning of this talk. America, we talk about America being exceptional and not in always the good ways, where America is this place where we have an extremely hyper-punitive society. It shows up as incarceration a lot of the time, and then it shows up in a lot of other ways too. We're very individualistic. We have bootstrapping mentality, where we expect folks to pick themselves up by their bootstraps all the time, without any kind of adequate social safety net. In other Western societies, it's just not like this, where we see people actually have the ability to thrive in their lives through things like critical investments in infrastructure, in access to clean water, right? Like, we tend to think of these ideas as separate when it comes to crime and incarceration, but they're so intricately involved. And so in that way, the United States is somewhat unique compared to other societies in the world. And I think that's where I was talking about these big shifts. Oftentimes academics are critiqued for talking about these like macro structural issues. Well, I think it really does come down to a macro structural problem in our society of how we treat people, where we invest our dollars, how we think about people, how we think about certain communities. Those are the big reasons why we see incarceration at such high rates in the United States. We're different. We are different than other societies around the world.
We also are a racist society, as you can see and witness that all the time. Again, opportunity. I mean, look at our 44th president, President Obama, master's from Harvard. The only job pretty much he went and got was community organizing. He didn't go to Wall Street. I knew someone who knows him really well. Wall Street, because he knew he couldn't be himself. He could not have a voice as a black man in those offices. So that's why he didn't accept that type of position. And Valerie Garrett was in charge of the law firm who gave him the opportunity. Otherwise, his $10,000 a year job as a community activist and organizer in Chicago was his only chance to be himself. So you can have all the education in the world, but there are no opportunities out there for a black man to be himself, to have a voice and not talk white. And I'm being honest with you, to be able to be himself and be able to dress the way he does, to be able to wear his hair the way he does, very few opportunities for them to be out there that somebody would allow them and not think twice. I've seen a lot of even Tuskegee Airmen I've interviewed coming from the war. Once they walked out the door finishing up the application, turned around and the lady threw their applications in the garbage. So this has been going on a long time, and the seeds are still there. Mm-hmm. So the opportunities are not there unless they are created. And a lot of the environment, even Dr. Ben Carson would have been incarcerated if he would have stuck this knife in this man's stomach. If he didn't have a belt buckle, he would have been incarcerated because he would have stabbed the guy. So the environments have a lot to do with it. He got out. That was just a chance. There's another gentleman I knew who almost sliced the guy's ear. Now he became a huge successful owning a fleet of buses. But that environment, just that quick, that one altercation would have ruined their whole lives. So the environments and the lack of opportunity has a lot to do with it.
There's another question over here.
I just wanted to ask, I think this Harbor, the program that you have, sounds really fabulous, and I have never heard of it, and I was just wondering, a couple questions, really. One is, how do you get the word out so that people that need to go there can go there? And do you have the room? I mean, or you guys need a plan to grow, or, because this is really fascinating. I can't believe those numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I love the Harbor, and there's one right up the street. Go up to Harbor, you go up to Mojave, go north, right on the corner of Harbor of Mojave and Washington is our original harbor right there. There are no beds there. It is not intended to be a place where people respite. It is a place where we connect them to resources and then put them back. We have tried very hard to get the word out through social media. Now you're talking to, remember, a Los Angeles Unified School District, not that bright. We've tried social media. We have a website. We've gone all throughout the news. If you YouTube it, you'll see my ugly mug on YouTube talking to you about it. But we've went to every single school in the district. We've briefed every law enforcement shift command, and we actually had an ad up on the what do they call them, the street signs or whatever, that change. I almost crashed my truck when I saw it. I was like, oh shit, right? It was so cool, but that did nothing for us. But it's really, honestly, the number one thing has been word of mouth. Number one has been word of mouth. And I encourage anybody here, come check it out, come look. Very, very proud of it. It's not perfect. It's not the silver bullet. Parents and love are the silver bullet, but it is something that is helping.
Great.
Any other questions? There's one back here, Jeff.
Okay, so my question is like this. Do you think there's a large, vast, because I see it all the time, there's a large, vast inequality of resources between places like Green Valley in the Upper West Side, or Summerlin in any kind of place, North Las Vegas? So I honestly think about it all the time. Like, how different would in elementary school, Kesterson be to somewhere, in North Las Vegas?
I don't know if I understood the question.
Did I hear you?
You're going to have to help me out.
Could you maybe repeat it?
I thought it was just me.
No, I think it's audio related. If you wouldn't mind just repeating it.
Okay, so I just want to know, for resources and stuff like that, would there be a really vast source of inequality between places like Green Valley or the West Side or North Las Vegas and Summerlin?
Are you asking if there's a source of inequality that has created that, we know that there's a Summerlin and a Green Valley, we also know there's a North Las Vegas. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
I think what he's asking is that the break-off between the different sectors.
Yeah, if Richard...
He's saying on the east side, he's saying in Las Vegas compared to Summerlin and Henderson or to North Las Vegas, the break-offs when it comes to resources and funding everything to help the young students. I think that's what he's trying to say. Is there a separation there?
Yes.
The more taxes you pay,
Yeah.
the higher the schools are invested in. So the lower the incomes, right? The lower the properties and all that, the less they're going to invest in schools and resources that they need.
This also taps back into, again, history, but this also taps back into histories of redlining, for example. White communities are much more invested in, structurally, financially, than Black or brown communities. We see that this isn't just a Las Vegas problem. This is a problem of pretty much every community, both metropolitan and rural. And we see this, for example, through practices like redlining, where Black families were not able to get mortgages. We still see, this practice has been outlawed, but we still see the ramifications of that. And so where certain families cannot get houses, cannot move into certain communities. So we see that being structurally cemented into society. And so that's part of why you'll see such stark lines in our community, in other communities. And again, historically, that's been a practice. It's been, again, that's where I said earlier on, this is not an accident. It's no wonder that this kind of inequality happens. It's built into the fabric of our society, and it shapes the way we think about those communities. It shapes whether we go to those communities, how we would invest, whether we would bring a business to those communities. You had talked earlier about grocery stores, right? So it snowballs into, again, structural lack of investment and also structural divestment from those communities. Does that answer your question? Does that get at what you're... It is, but it's a good question. And it also is like, it's kind of the elephant in the room in some ways. If we're going to talk about community, right, what does our community look like, and how do we divide our community in some ways? And yeah, it's kind of right before our eyes. So I'm glad you brought the question up.
Yeah, thank you.
Shakayla, could I ask that question in a slightly different way?
Yes.
For Mr. Martin, maybe. When you look at the kids who are circulating through juvenile justice and also through the Harbor program, though, are they all coming from one area, or are they coming from all over the valley?
Well, I have data that would make your head hurt. So I can tell you the number one zip codes and the number one schools and all of that. But yeah, there's definitely over policing. There's definitely, there's the school to prison pipeline not only exists, it's celebrated and rewarded and funded at a massive level here, especially in Clark County.
Yes.
And there is also, we need to be careful about just funding a school, because Matt Kelly Elementary School is one of our poorest schools. It's socioeconomic surrounding it, but internally it's one of the highest funded schools from the school district. So what we have is per pupil spending is off the charts, but we also have a culture of poverty. Yeah. When I say we've beaten the hope out of communities, we've beaten the hope out of not just the babies, we've beaten the hope out of all the generations. We have generations that don't know how to learn, and we don't have generations that understand the value of work or employment or have opportunity to get work or employment. So
and also don't trust these institutions for good reasons.
Right. So we need to be very careful, about how, if we oversimplify it. Yeah. The reality is, yes, I can tell you exactly where our hot spots of crime are. We do crime mapping and CompStat and all that really cool copy shit. The reality is all of us know. We all know. You can tell. I can coordinate expulsions and suspensions at a high school. I can tell you right now, I probably have more kids at that school that are on probation than the school next door. So if they have an actual a real restorative justice program happening at that school, not what we like to call restorative justice, if there's an actual program happening there, I guarantee you I'm going to have less kids on probation, less incidents of violence, less incidents of gunplay, all that stuff. So it's, this permeates and percolates all throughout from the community, grassroots.
What's the number one zip code?
89110. 89115, 89106,
Interesting.
89131, right? Those are our five tops.
Any other questions? There's two over here.
Okay, so I think it's clear to any student in the Valley that education is horribly underfunded. And blame can be assigned to policing and to the government and everywhere. But there's absolutely blame to be assigned to students as a whole. And the fact that there is not education being put into these things, to these students, how do you think that is to be addressed so that the students understand the ramifications of the things they do as a whole?
Well, I think that starts at zero, right? When you have parents, I grew up in foster care I was 2 days old in foster care. I didn't have parents. They didn't teach me the value of education. That wasn't something that was intrinsically taught to me. If it's not taught to me, and the hustle is what's taught to me, and the grind is what's taught to me, I can't expect a student that's from that to value education. I would love for it, and what you're telling me, I love what you're saying. I would love for there to be more peer-to-peer education where other students like you that understand the value of education are willing to stand up with us in community and say, listen, baby boys, you know, this education, it matters, it's valuable. But I don't know if I want to blame students, not yet. I'm quick to blame. You've heard me up here. I'm a blaming son of a bitch, but you know, I mean, I don't know. I definitely want to assign it where it's appropriate.
Yeah, I'm interested in what you mean. If you wouldn't mind speaking a little bit more to what you mean by blaming students. Yeah, say more about that if you wouldn't mind.
I guess I feel that that students need to understand that they are responsible for their own actions as well, and that there is something to be said for them having no ramifications when they do things.
I have two responses. That helps a lot, thank you. I have two responses to that. One, I think restorative justice has a lot of beautiful potential when it's done right. And that means bringing people who, you know, in schools, we've seen this in a lot of institutions, but in schools is sort of where we first started seeing it. And when we can bring people together, somebody who's harmed another person, wronged another person, and deal with that without bringing a school resource officer, AKA a police officer, into the equation, really amazing things can happen from that. Kids stay in school, we see less suspensions and expulsions, so therefore the child is not being removed from the educational environment. So I think restorative justice has a really cool potential to help students recognize some of those things and help build relationships as opposed to deteriorate them. The other response, which I don't blame students for, but I think would help students, is historically accurate education, right? Thinking about, learning about historical disenfranchisement and racism in this country. What does that look like? What does white supremacy look like? How does it show up in our institutions? How does it show up in the job force, right? These other places where in public education, we should be learning these things, right? And I wasn't really taught about that until I got to high school, and I had a really amazing teacher at my high school who said, okay, we're gonna learn world history, but we're not using this book, right? So it's like, okay, well, we have these books, we have these texts, we have these tools, but then what do we do instead, right? We have to teach historically accurate education to students so that they understand that their actions, their beliefs, their ideologies have real consequences for their peers, for their families, for their communities, right? And I think that has started to gain some traction. There's a lot of really cool people doing some of that work, like Brian Stevenson, for example. He is extremely committed to a lot of different arenas of social justice, but he's one person who's been extremely committed to kind of rewriting the narrative that we have in public education systems and getting historically accurate information into our textbooks in public education, making sure students are receiving those messages in a very honest and raw way, and then making sure that students are responsible for that information and taking that where they need to go. Does that help? Do you feel like that answered your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, sure.
I also think it's very nice to hear that you actually think about accountability and looking at that. I think a lot more younger generations are starting to hold each other accountable and kind of, in a sense, policing each other. You know, you look out for each other more, you're more aware of social cues that are happening, things that are going on, and trying to hold each other accountable. And I think that's going to make for a stronger community as you guys get older, because you're being more aware of what's happening with your peers, you're holding them accountable for their choices, or you're trying to push them to make better choices. And I see that a lot with the younger generation happening. So I think that's really a big thing to say, is how do we hold each other accountable for our choices?
Can I add on to this just quickly? I want to add on that because you use the term policing each other, right? And I think in addition to that, make sure that you're showing each other grace and love, right? And bringing it back to the idea that, like, a lot of things need to be unlearned in our society. And so giving each other the space to learn and supporting each other in that process, not just through like a policing surveillance lens, but actually working together on those ideas. I think that will be the most fruitful change.
You know, one of the things that back in the military, when it was segregated, under the Truman administration, what they did was once they integrated the military and the barracks and all of that, what they had demanded that all white, especially officers, receive Black history education so they can understand what's in front of them and understand what these men have endured. Okay, I taught adult education for about 7 years, and I loved it because I had the freedom to teach history, not just Black history, but history. And the kids really loved it because they can understand what they're looking at. When they look at CNN, they can know that that happened 40 years ago. There was a plague in 1970, just like COVID, right? 1917. What happened then? That's when Vicks Vapor was. They love all of that so they can understand their environment. They feel more confident. They go home and they share that. The school district is missing a great opportunity to teach about what these Nazis, a lot of these rap songs have it in there. They don't have a clue. There was a song I used, a video. They must have had about 50 historical references in it. They had no idea they were in there because they didn't know what they were looking at. They don't know the differences. It's from the beginning of Civil War and the racism that started, and it's still here. If the school district can get on board with that, I think that our relations and our appreciation for each other and all of the things that's going on, the homosexuals and all this stuff has been going on for years. It would be more appreciated and be more realistically looked at rather than like something different or maybe it's their fault or it's happening on their clock, because it's not. So I totally agree with you.
Mr. Martin, were you going to say something?
I'm always trepidatious when I hear accountability, because we as a human race, we love accountability when it has to do with her. But I want nothing to do with my own accountability, right? We love accountability when it's on somebody else's back. We want none of it for our own behavior or any of our own, right? And we will come up with a million excuses why we did the stupid shit we did, right? And we will come up with a million reasons why we should absolutely burn somebody at the cross for what they did, right? So I always want accountability to be about for all of us. Same rules apply to every single one of us. And I'll tell you, this world would be a whole lot better if we held ourselves accountable to the same standard we hold everybody else to.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
I agree.
Just my thought.
Yep.
So a lot of people widely debate, like, should it be more about understanding, awareness? Should there be changes in laws, changes in the system, or like completely taking it down and rebuilding it? But what do you think should be done about systematic oppression? Like how there's over-policing and there's punishment for being in poverty, there's no resources. People have to pretend to be something else to be seen as professional or unthreatening. So what do you think should be done in order for that to be changed, if you think it's even attainable?
It's a big question.
That's a loaded question.
It's important. It's important. I think about this every single day.
We can answer that probably in about 2 days,
Yeah,
right?
I was going to say, you got a few weeks. I mean, I don't know if anyone wants to jump in. I think about this every single day. I really do. I think that we need to have a serious reckoning with ourselves as a country. We really do, right? And we need to understand that we are a country of diverse people from different backgrounds, different lived experiences. That's going to take a lot. And changing minds and hearts takes a long time. I think the organizers in the room will tell you it takes a long time to help people believe in something again, right? Or to help inspire hope or to change minds. I do think it's possible. I don't think it's unattainable. But I also think that we've lost some hope around that. So tangibly, it's a tough question to answer. In terms of over-policing, this is something I think about a lot. And over-policing is one of those things that is so deeply embedded in our society, because policing is not just a practice, it's also an ideology, right, that seeps into a lot of our social institutions. And we have to disrupt that. We have to stop bringing police into schools, stop bringing police into hospitals. We have to think differently and creatively beyond policing to respond to social issues and to think differently about them. So, and we also all have to, coming back to this idea of accountability, we have to think about the ways that we have internalized policing ideology in ourselves, right? How do we look at each other? How do we try to socially control each other? You know, how are we operating in the world? And I think some of that reflection is important too. But over-policing as a practice is a huge concern, and it's a lot of the reason why we see certain communities in the criminal justice system. Not because they commit more crime, because they don't. It's just a matter of who's policed, who's arrested, who's brought in, who has money to fight the system. And that's the reality. If we want to talk about root causes of crime, it's really about, like, you know, who has the money to fight the system, who gets policed, right?
And we hire the system. We as voters in this room, we hire the system. If we want change, we make change, and we do it at the ballot box. If we don't want to fund systems, then we as a people need to speak to changing those things, right? And we need to stop shouting at each other across aisles where we, you know, as soon as you start hollering, I stop listening, right? As soon as I stop hollering, you stop listening. We need to start having honest conversations about how we're going to move this forward for every person. Right? I go back to this, the most basic core level. Every single child in our community, without exception, deserves everything, right? And if we can get to that space, the rest of it will figure itself out. It ain't gonna be fast, and I wish it, goddamn, I wish it would. You know what I mean? I think all of us do. But we need to also understand the power that we do have. Walk around, educate, talk, be kind. You know, have conversations, push this agenda, move this agenda. You're young. Shit, make it happen. Captain, I'm saying that with all the love in the world. And you need help, you just call me. I'm right down the street.
We have run out of time, but I do want to say a special thank you to each of our panelists for their insight during tonight's program, and for each of you for being here tonight. We talked about community and how what we're talking about matters, and so I think it's remarkable that you're here and willing to learn. And so our last program, as I mentioned, this is a 3-part program series. Our last program of the Breaking the Cycle of Incarceration series, that will be held next month on June 29th from 7 to 8:30 right here in the courtroom. And that's called Life After Prison, the challenging transition from incarceration to community. And during that program, we will be exploring recidivism and reentry in the state of Nevada. So we certainly hope to see you there. Thank you all for coming, and please give our panelists a final round of applause.